Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to look at arranging shapes, and we're going to look at layers and sublayers in Illustrator. So we're back to our three shapes on screen. And we understand now that every time we draw a shape, it sits on top of every other shape that's on the screen. And I can manipulate this very easily. If I select one of these shapes, I go up to Object, and I choose Arrange. And you'll see that there's 4 commands: bring to front, bring forward, send backward, and send to back. So bring to front and send to back, take the shape and move it all the way to the front, no matter how many shapes there are, or all the way to the back. Now this shape is already in the very back, right? So if we click send to back, nothing's going to happen. If I click bring to front, you'll see that it's now sitting in front of those other 2 shapes, as you can see here. Now, I can also use the other commands. If I select a shape, go to Object, go to Arrange, and I can say bring forward or send backward. So bring forward, it's going to step one shape forward at a time, send backward 1 shape back at a time. Since it's already as far forward as it can go, I can choose send backward, and now you'll see that the shape is sitting in between the other 2 shapes, right? Because we have sent it in between the 2 shapes. Now that works really, really, really well when you only have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 shapes on the screen. As soon as you get more than a handful of shapes on the screen, it starts to become confusing to figure out which shape is in front of which. So instead of that, we can use our layers. So we're going to go over to our layers palette. First thing is I have a visibility icon, which makes the layer visible or invisible, turns the layer on or off. Then I have a lock symbol. When I place that lock symbol into there, I cannot edit that layer. So lots of times when you're editing a document, depending on how sophisticated or how large the document is, you may want to take the layer and make it invisible or lock it. I'm going to unlock it. Now, there's a little layer thumbnail here, and one of the things is that I can name a layer, right? What we're going to do first, though, is we're going to come over here and click this little triangle, and what we're looking at here are sublayers. So each of these objects is on its own separate layer. So I can shuffle the order of these objects by clicking and dragging them inside of the sublayer, right? So I can just click and drag, and as I drag, the overlapping of those objects will be shown on screen. I can close that. Now, you can also lock these sublayers. My suggestion is that you don't, because what happens is people lock those sublayers, then they forget, and then they try to select the object, and invariably it takes me time, minutes, to figure out why this particular object isn't being manipulated. So I'm going to close that. So that is my layer, and then I have sublayers. Now, in addition to that, I can have whole layers. I'm going to click the Make New Layer button, Create New Layer. I've made a new layer, and what I'm going to do is take one of these shapes and move it to that new layer. So I'll select the circle. Notice that when I select the circle, the layer that the shape is on becomes active in the layers, right? So I'll go up to Edit, and I'm going to choose the Cut command. Then I'm going to click into the next layer. I'm going to go up to Edit and choose the Paste command. Notice that there's a few different pastes: paste in front, paste in back, paste in place. We'll get to that later. Right now, we're just going to do a separate single paste, and I pasted that shape into a new layer. Notice that it pastes the shape right into the middle of the canvas. So now I have 2 layers. I have 3 shapes and 2 layers, and I can take that, turn it on and off, and I can also lock it. Let's take another shape and put it on another separate layer. And I'm going to do it a different way this time. I'm going to make a new layer by clicking the Make New Layer button. And this time, what I'm going to do is select one of the shapes on screen, but instead of going up to Edit and choosing Edit, Cut, and then click into the layer and then choosing Edit, Paste, over here on the right, on your layers palette, is this little bitty, this very small little square, and when you mouse over it, it says Indicate its selected art. Click to select art. And I can click on that and drag that up to the layer where I want it. So now each of these objects is on a separate layer. How do I know? When I click on the object, it shows me what layer it is on my layers. And when I click on the layer, it shows me which object is on that layer. So I can go back and forth between the two to find my objects and select them. Now, once again, I can shuffle the order of the objects by clicking on a layer, dragging it in between or above. Right now, let's make them overlap so you can see this. In between or above them, and shuffle the order of the layers. Now, you have to be careful with this because it's really easy to make a sub-layer, to grab a layer and drag it into the subcategory of another layer. So that's something you have to be aware of. So what we've done here is we've taken each of these objects and put them on separate layers. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, the idea is that I can isolate these objects. If I make the other two layers locked, then I only have to worry about editing this one object because the other layers have been locked. Or in some circumstances, I may want to turn the other layers off and make the layers invisible. So those are some of the reasons why you lock and make separate layers. Now I'm going to take all the shapes and move them back down onto the bottom layer. So right now the top shape is selected. I click on the shape, and I'm going to do it both ways. One is to use to indicate selected art, drag that down to the bottom layer, and I know the shape is now on the bottom layer. The other way is to select the shape. I'll select the shape on the second layer, go up to Edit, choose Cut, click on the bottom layer, go to Edit, and choose Paste, and all three shapes are back down on the bottom layer. I have some empty layers that I don't need. So if I have a layer I don't need, I can click on the layer, click on the trash can, and get rid of it. Click on the layer, click on the trash can. Now, if I click on a layer and try to get rid of it that's got content on it, it's very different. Let me take one of these shapes, make a new layer, move it up to the new layer, and then I'm going to start to throw it away. And you see that Illustrator stops me and asks, layer 2 contains artwork. Do you want to delete this layer? In other words, they're saying, hey, there's something on this layer. Are you sure you want to delete the layer? Because if you delete the layer, you're going to delete the art. So the idea is that it kind of just stops you from doing that. Okay, so that's some ideas about working with layers. And as I said before, you can name the layer. If I double click here, I can name the circle, name it circle, or whatever the case may be. I can name each one of the layers, and then I can stack my objects. So this is important whether I'm doing a design, or I'm doing a poster or a brochure. I may have a set of layers, one for the background, one for the text, one for the images, one for my headers. Or if I'm doing an illustration, I may have a layer for the background, a layer for the foreground objects, a layer for the patterns, a layer for the illustrations, or whatever the case may be. So you use layers a lot in Illustrator. Remember that the layers in Illustrator are oriented around shapes. So they operate a bit differently than the layers that you may be used to if you are if you're more used to working with, say, Photoshop. Let's stop there.